Hello there, good morning and a very warm welcome to this Fast Start webinar for Sage 50 Cloud Payroll. My name's Duncan, I'm your trainer for today's session. It should take approximately 1 hour and we're going to cover a few essential tasks in getting started with the Sage 50 Cloud Payroll software. So we're going to begin with a quick tour of the Sage 50 Cloud Payroll software to show you how to find your way around and where you'll find all of the main tasks. We're then going to explore some essential settings, those settings that need to be in place before you're able to run your first payroll. We'll take a look at employee records, how to set them up and what information you'll be storing in those records. We'll then explore pay elements and the salary feature in the software, which will be used to pay your employees. We'll cover the main pension scheme settings. We'll take a quick look at setting up online services should you wish to host your pay slips in the cloud. And then we have a couple of tips for those of you moving to Sage from another payroll provider if you're doing this midway through a tax year. So if your employees have already been paid during the year, it's all around either entering brought forward information or processing those historical periods. So like I say, that should take about an hour, but it will be available at the end of the webinar if you want to stick around for any further questions, but I'll be answering them as they come through. So that's what your questions panel is for on the right-hand side of the screen. So a couple of assumptions for this webinar. We are assuming that you've already downloaded and installed your Sage 50 Cloud Payroll software, and you have that desktop shortcut there that will launch the program, and that you've been through and created your company, entering the basic company details. If you haven't yet done that and you need help with it, you'll find plenty of help from our help center, and I'll show you a couple of ways to access that as we go through the demos today. So let's kick off the webinar with a quick tour of the Sage 50 Cloud Payroll software. And the best way to do this is to show you it in action. So I'm going to share my other screen where I've already got the payroll software open. So you should be seeing that now, Sage 50 Cloud Payroll. I'm on the latest version, and we're going to take you through how to navigate the software and point out some of the most commonly used kind of areas. So first, a bit on navigation. Here on the left-hand side, you'll find various navigation groups, starting with the payroll group here at the top of the screen and working your way right way down to Sage Services. So these different groups or modules will group together related tasks and links here on the left-hand side of the screen. So here in the payroll option, you'll find all the tasks involved in actually running your payroll. And these are the tasks that we cover in our second webinar, Running Payroll with Sage 50, which we'll be doing tomorrow at 11 a.m. if you wanted to sign up for that one. We've then got the employee tasks, all around creating and maintaining employee records. We have company tasks where you'll find the company settings, and you'll be able to set up things like pension schemes, holiday schemes, or the link to Sage accounts, the nominal settings. You have some e-submission tasks, which are all involved in communicating with HMRC online, so sending your payroll information or accessing your notifications. We have other online services available. So you might use our online pensions data exchange if you have our pensions module, or online documents or online services, which are used for setting up online pay slips. And then we've got a section specifically on payroll year end, and this takes you through the steps that you'll complete at the end of each tax year, producing P60s for your employees and finishing up that year's payroll. A couple of other things available in desktop. So you've got desktop options, which includes an automatic backup feature, which should be switched on by default, and you can access a payroll calendar. So if you want to set up any tasks and be reminded of those tasks, you can do that in your payroll software from this option. So that's how we're going to navigate through the software using these navigation groups here on the left-hand side. And then the main work area that you'll see is a default view of your employee list. So I've already got one employee set up. I'm going to show you how to create more employee records a little bit later on. There are some other useful tasks at the top of the employee list. So some selection tools to clear any selections or swap the selection, which is handy when you're selecting your employees to pay them. There's a criteria option which helps you organize your employees by their payment frequency or by other organizational groups such as departments. And you can filter your list using some of these options, for example, to hide people that have left your employment. The criteria kind of opens up this outline pane. So you can see when I click on outline, it gives you those groups that we've just seen. So the different pay periods, monthly, weekly, for example, if you've got different pay frequencies on your payroll. And then I can drill down, and I've actually organized by department as well. So it might come in handy when I start running reports or actually processing my payroll to organize my employee list like so. We also have access to the main payroll reports from this toolbar at the top, and some help options. We've got our virtual assistant, Peg, who can answer your payroll questions. We have information around automatic enrolment pensions and a handy link to our online help center, which I will just show you, which is where you can search our knowledge base. You can read all of our support guides. You can access short videos. You can also access some of the training options available to you. So you've got the link in product to the help center. You can also find it from your browser at sage.co.uk/help. And you can see here, we've got the search bar to search the knowledge base. We've then got some trending topics that are being asked about at the moment. The how-to guides, particularly useful if you haven't already installed or if you're getting started with the software. So do check these out as well. And also various videos and our video library. So a great kind of help resource with links to further free training, which I'll mention at the end of the webinar, available with one click within your software. So that's your default view, the employee list. Other views you can switch to, if you click on this change view option at the top, include a process map where available. So here on the payroll option, we can switch on the payroll process, which gives us a map to follow to work through our payroll process when we come to pay our employees. You get something similar on the company module. So these are processes that you would run through when initially setting up your software or making changes to company settings. And then we saw this one earlier, the payroll year-end process map are the processes that you follow at the end of each tax year. But not all the modules have a process map. The employee module, for example, only gives you the option of an employee list and the other view, which is the company dashboard. You're not going to see much in this demo because I haven't started processing in the program, but it does give you an overview of employer costs by tax month and a graph that will show the payments that you make into HMRC each month. So that updates automatically as you start using the software, but I'm just going to switch it back to the employee list. So a quick whistle top store there. I'm going to give you a recap of some of those main areas before we move on and explore the company settings in a bit more depth. So we started on the left-hand side of the screen. That's your navigation groups, where you get the related tasks and links listed on the left-hand side. We're going to use the employee and company options mostly in today's webinar. And then the main view will be the employee list by default. So it will always show a list of your employees, but if you use the change view option, you'll be able to switch on process maps if they're available. You'll be able to view the company dashboard if you want to. And then you've got the selection tools, the reports, and the help resources, including that help center, available above the employee list. So some of you will be familiar with this if you've used the software before. So let's now move on and start to take a look at the essential payroll settings and the sort of stuff that you will need in place to be able to run your first pay run. So these are the absolute essentials. You're going to need to enter your employer PAYE reference and your accounts office reference. So these are the references that you were given when you first enroll as an employer, and you'll find them either by signing into your online PAYE account on the HMRC website or any documentation you've been sent by HMRC. And you're going to need your user ID and password, which are the credentials used to log in to PAYE online, as they are used when you submit your payroll online to HMRC. So in the next demo, I'm going to show you where these settings live. I'm also going to point out the other company settings very briefly and explain what they do. And once we've took a look at that, we'll be moving on and looking at employee records in the next section. So back over to the demo. I'm going to go to the company tasks here on the left-hand side, and I'll see them all listed within the tasks pane on the left-hand side. Or if I switch to the company process, we'll see these icons that we could work through as well. So first thing I'll do is I'll go into the company settings for you. And here on the first tab, on the details tab, you'll find your company name, address and contact details. And then the first of those key references, which is labeled tax district / reference on this tab, is where you need to enter your PAYE reference. So it starts with a 3-digit tax district, and then it's letters and numbers, usually in the second half, sometimes just numbers, which would be the rest of your reference. So if you're not sure what it is, you can always sign in to PAYE online to check, but that needs to be entered in order to do your submissions to HMRC. Now you've also got various other settings here on the right-hand side. So one that I will just pick out is eligible for small employers relief, which is something you would select if you're recovering statutory payments and you qualify for small employers relief, meaning that you can recover a larger percentage of those payments from HMRC. You'll find more information on small employers relief in our help centre. And the employment allowance setting. So many businesses are eligible for the government's employment allowance. It allows you to reduce your employer national insurance contributions by up to £4,000 per year. And if you qualify, you'll need to apply for it each year by making a submission to HMRC. And then when you work out your payment at the end of each month, it'll automatically claim back the amount of employment allowance you're entitled to. So there are qualifying conditions. For example, your total employer national insurance for the previous year needs to be £100,000 or less. And it's not available to companies which just have a single director on the payroll. But if you are setting up and you're eligible for this allowance, you just need to run through these steps. Apply for employment allowance, choose whether state aid is applicable to your business, which it is to most businesses, and then choose the state aid sector. You'll then do a submission, which will inform HMRC that you're claiming this allowance. So that is then sent online, and you can tick the box to say there that you are eligible. And we'll see how that affects the end of month payment in part 2 of these webinars when we take you through a pay run. So details tab is just there. I'll quickly zip through some of the other settings. So you can record company bank details on the bank tab. It's also where you can set up Sage e-banking, which helps you create files that you'd upload to your online banking if you want to make payments that way. There are coinage settings, which aren't widely used these days. It allows you to report on what coins and banknotes you would need if you're paying your wages in cash. There are some absence tools where you can create working patterns for holidays and sickness, which allows you to track holidays taken and any statutory sick pay payments that you need to make. The analysis section is where you create some of the organizational groups. So I've set up departments for my payroll because I might want to report on separate departments, or even perhaps process the payroll for them separately. So I've set them up just here and they can be assigned to the employees. But you can also set up cost centers and custom analysis fields, which can be used for anything that isn't recorded by default. A couple of sections for recording funding you've received from HMRC to help you pay tax refunds or statutory payments. And then there's a tab where you record details of the payments you've been making each month. And this grid actually populates automatically when you run a P32 report at the end of each month. And this is where the other reference goes, the accounts office reference, which is the one that you quote when you make payments to HMRC. Again, it'll have the tax district at the start, the 3 digits, a letter P, and then another letter, and then there'll be a further 8-digit reference at the end of that one. So if you are a limited company, you can put your corporation tax reference in, or if you're a sole trader or partnership, you've got your self-assessment UTR that can be filled in as well. So last thing in the company settings is an area where you can store documents if you want quick access to them from your payroll software. These documents can be links to other areas, perhaps on your PC or network, or you can actually copy files into the same location as your payroll data to get quick access to them. So you'll be able to add your documents down here should you wish to, and then anyone that logs in can go into the company settings and access the documents from here. So we've seen the PAYE reference and accounts office reference. The other thing that must be entered before you can start processing payroll are your e-submission details. So you'll see there is an e-submission settings link in the company process, or you can find the same thing from the e-submissions tasks. So it's pulled through our company name, tax district and reference. But you would need to fill in your user ID and your password, which are the same details used to log in on the HMRC website, gov.uk. And you would also supply some contact details. So do make sure these are up to date. If you've just taken over the payroll or you're using the software for the first time, contact details should be entered here. And the email address sent in your submissions would be used to send you a confirmation email to confirm that they've received your FPS. So it's worth checking those are up to date, that your user ID and password are entered. And there is also an option that I'll come back to later to send a dummy FPS, which is something that you might want to do if you're just practicing using the software for some historical periods, because you're starting to go live with Sage Payroll midway through a tax year. So as I say, I'll explain more about that later on, but that's something that's there found in the e-submission settings. So that's about it for the essentials. Quick recap of what we showed you there. So within company settings, we had our employer PAYE reference, and on the HMRC payments tab, the accounts office reference. And you've just there seen the e-submission settings where we've got the government gateway user ID and password. And all of those details can be checked by signing into your online account at gov.uk/PAYE-online. So now that we've covered company details, let's take a closer look at the employee records that you'll be saving within your software. So I'm going to show you where you can set up the employee records. Also going to run through some of the key employee information that you'll need. And we're going to give you a demo of importing employee records for those of you just starting out, particularly if you've already got employee information from your previous payroll system or stored in Excel, for example. So when it comes to creating and keeping employee records, there are some key personal details that must be recorded accurately in order to match up with the online systems at HMRC. So the key personal details are the employee's full name. So this should be in the exact same format that you'd find on their passport, for example. So you wouldn't use any abbreviated names or just initials, full first name and surname. You need to provide an address and postcode for each employee, an accurate date of birth. So please check what it is. Don't just make it up. The employee's gender and their national insurance number. Now, if you don't have the NI number, you can mark it as not known, and you'll be able to trace the national insurance number by submitting an NI verification request, which is one of your e-submissions tasks. So what I'm going to do in the next demo is we're going to take a look through an existing employee record just to show you the format of that. And then I'm going to show you some ways of creating the employee records, either for individual employees, for example, if you're taking on new employees to an existing payroll, or a way of importing the records for those of you that are starting out for the first time with Sage Payroll. So let me just jump back over to the software. I'm going to come back to the employee tasks for this section. So this is where we'll be able to access employee records. And I'm going to open the existing record, the one I prepared earlier, just by selecting it on the list and then either clicking employee record from the tasks, or alternatively, I can right click it and I can open the employee record from this menu. So similar to the company settings, it's all laid out in various tabs, starting with the employee's personal details, surname, forename, address and postcode. You can record email addresses, which will be required if you're going to use any of our online services. And we've got things like date of birth and gender here on the personal tab. The employee reference is assigned automatically when you set it up in the software. But if you look at the employment tab, you are able to create your own works number should you need to use your own numbering system, or if you have any references that also include letters. So also on the employment tab, you can record job title, and it's where the employee's tax code, national insurance category, and NI number are recorded as well. So we've got the start date. The leave date would be entered if you're processing any leavers, which we cover in part 2. And each employee will be assigned an RTI payroll ID, which is generated automatically by the system, although you can use your own payroll ID when you're setting up the records if you are switching from a previous system and you want to keep using a previous ID. The employment tab is also where you will assign any pay elements or enter salary details. We're going to cover that in the next section of the webinar. Year-to-date values are recorded in this section as well. It's also where you can set up student and postgraduate loans. So there's the pensions tab, where you'll be able to assign pension schemes, set the pension contributions, and if you use our pensions module, you'll be able to check the auto-enrollment status, which is the result of any assessment that you've done. You've got the absence diary in each record, where you can record any statutory absences, which will help you pay statutory sick pay, maternity pay, adoption, or paternity. And it's also where you can record other absences, such as holidays taken or booked, or a range of other absences and custom absences that you can set up yourself. And there are reports available to report on any absences that you record in this section. You can also record details of company cars that the employee uses for private use, and that can be used to work out the benefit amount for a P11D, or even for payrolling that benefit. You can record employee bank details, which you would need to use e-banking or Sage salary payments. Analysis options is where I've assigned a department to the employee. And you can also set up access levels for each employee record. And then if you have multiple users using payroll, you can restrict them to only view employees of specific levels or up to a specific level. And then it's also where we set up electronic documents and online services. So that's here on the analysis tab. History is where you'll find a history of payments that have been made in the current tax year, which we can't see right now because we haven't processed any payroll. And then the Terms tab allows you to record the employment terms, which can then be printed on a statement of a written statement of employment particulars, or statement of employment, easier way to say it. I'll just preview what the standard one looks like. Basically pulls through information from the employee record, and it can be provided to employees that start work for you if you don't have alternative means of doing this. So employment details, some of the payment details, and then it's pulling through the terms that were entered on the Terms tab. Finally, there's a Documents area, similar to what we saw for the company settings. So you can add documents for easy access through the employee record. You can link to it, copy it in, or add a document and upload it to the to the payroll data location. So loads of stuff you can record there for your employees. I'm going to show you where to set those employee records up, and we'll also show you how to import them if that's something that might help you out when you're first starting to use the program. So if you are creating employee records individually, maybe you've got a very small payroll, or your payroll's already been set up and you're just adding new starters, for example, you can either use the Employee Wizard, which is this task on the left-hand side, or the Quick Employee option. So the Employee Wizard takes you through step by step. So you enter a little bit of information as you go through. Anything with a star next to it is mandatory, but obviously you should provide as much information as you can. And then you would keep working your way through, entering things like the employee start date. And you have the option when creating employee records to change the RTI payroll ID, which ordinarily you wouldn't need to do for any new starter. But if you are moving from other payroll software and you want to reuse payroll IDs that software used, you would be able to edit this at the point you create the record. And you can say that old payroll ID is as above. Or alternatively, if you just want to use the new payroll ID, you would say that the previous one was unknown. So it then asks you for starter form details if it's a new starter, or if it's an existing employee, just use the non-existing employee option. So basically you work through each of those stages, providing the information, and that will then create an employee record. A similar option, a little bit quicker to use, is the Quick Employee, where all of the basic information is entered on a single screen. So we've got personal details, right to work check, the RTI payroll ID again, and then starter form details, P45, P46, or existing employee being the main options. And then you can do things like add the gross salary and start to assign pay elements. So pretty straightforward to use. I'm not going to run through sort of a load of data entry for you, because I do want to show you a quick way of setting up records, particularly if you have got the existing employee records exported from other software. So there are import routines in the software. You can import loads of different information. Some of the key things being employee details, but then also further down the line, you might want to import payment amounts if you've got them recorded elsewhere. But I'll show you how to import the employee records, and I'm going to use an import template to help us with this. So first of all, to find the import templates, if you go to the Help menu at the top of the screen and then choose About, it'll load up a support homepage for you. And then you would just need to click on the program directory, which you find here under Program Details. And that will open up a link to a CSV templates folder, where you've got templates for importing various information. So in our case, it would be the employee details that we're importing. So I'll start by showing you what the template looks like. So it comes with all of these column headings entered for you. They are color coded, so anything blue is mandatory. And then the yellow fields are optional. And when it comes to employee references, it is mandatory if you're updating an employee detail, so it knows which record to update. Or if you leave it blank, it'll just use the next available employee reference and create a new record when you import. So each field will give you more information in the comments as to the format of what you need to enter. And to show you one that I created earlier, I've got one here on my desktop. I've just copied and pasted information from my previous payroll software into the relevant columns. I've entered the gross salary information if you're going to be using the salary option to pay your employees. We'll cover that in more detail next. And also there are some sections for the payroll ID. So if you wanted to use your existing payroll ID, you can enter it here. Or if you're just going to use the system generated payroll ID and it's an existing employee, just in the ID status column, if you set that to 0, just indicates that the previous ID is unknown. So we've got some information here ready to import. I've got it in Excel format. What I can then do in the program is I can go to File and Advanced Data Import. It's always worth backing up your payroll data before you import anything in case something doesn't go to plan. But I'll just run through the steps. We're going to choose employee details. I'm then going to browse to my Excel file. So it's on my desktop. It's this one here, employee details to import. And because I used a template, what it does in the next stage is it automatically matches up my import fields with the payroll fields because it uses the exact same description. But if you had different column headings, you could manually match your column headings to what's expected in payroll to get that column to import into the relevant payroll field. So I'm just going to click Finish. And you will see that 9 new records have been created, employees 2 through to 10 in my case. But because I also had a line for employee 1, this record has been updated with any changes that were in that import file. So if I close the import results, you can see that the rest of my employees have now joined employee 1. And we can then access that record, we can view the details. It contains the information that we have then imported. Right, so we're going to move on to payments and salary next, but I'll just pick up a couple of questions. Kimberly, I think you're just looking for some clarity on the employment reference and the payroll ID. So is the employment reference their clock number, etc.? Essentially, there are 3 references. There's the one that the program identifies the employee from, which is the employee reference, just uses the next available number. If you have your own numbering system, you could probably enter that as a works number here on the employment tab. The RTI payroll ID is what's sent to HMRC when you make submissions. So it might be known as a payroll ID, an RTI ID in your previous software. So you could reuse what you had before when you create the records, or you could just go with this new RTI payroll ID and specify that the previous one was unknown. So yeah, employee reference, Sage Payroll uses works number. You can customize, you can put letters and numbers in that one if you needed to. And then RTI ID and employee reference can't be changed once you've created the record. Lovely. So a quick recap on that before we move on. Those were your key personal details. Make sure they are entered accurately. These were the methods of setting up individual employees. So for example, new starters, or if you've got a very small payroll that you're setting up, probably just as quick to do this as opposed to importing. And finally, we looked at the advanced data import wizard using an import template if you wanted to bring information that you've previously exported from your old payroll software. Right, so I'm going to keep going. We've got a few other topics to cover in the webinar. Next thing we're going to take a look at are pay elements, including the salary feature available in the software. So to explain what a pay element is, we'll take a quick look at a pay slip. The pay elements are the different items of pay or the different deduction items that you might find on a pay slip. For example, a salary payment, a bonus payment, an overtime payment, or a deduction for things like union subscriptions or some kind of Christmas savings club. Now, there are also statutory deductions, things like tax and national insurance, as well as pension deductions, which are kind of separate to pay elements because they are calculated and deducted for you. But we're going to concentrate mainly on those pay elements that are used to pay your staff. So the things such as salary, bonus, and overtime. So two different ways that you can set up pay elements in the software. The simplest option for those employees that are paid a fixed amount every week, month, or an annual salary divided equally is to use the salary details section. So this is where you record the salary amount, and you can enter it as a yearly amount or a weekly or a monthly amount. You'd also record the contracted hours the employee normally works, which can be used then to calculate overtime rates and things like that. And that would then create a salary payment that would be used to pay that fixed amount to the employee. Now, for everything else, you would set up a pay element. So for example, you might have casual employees that work different hours every time they are paid. So you might create an hourly rate payment for their basic hours. You might have bonus payments. You could have overtime payments. You can create a payment for sort of any reason with any label that you might need. So hourly or non-salary payments set up as pay elements. Fixed amounts, you'd probably want to use the salary details, but there's nothing stopping you creating a pay element for fixed salary payments if you prefer to do it that way. And as well as the payments, you'll see there are options for deductions, loans, attachment of earnings, net payments and salary sacrifice, which I'll briefly show you in the demo. So what I'm going to do is I'll take you through the salary details first. We're then going to set up a pay element for an overtime payment, and I'll show you how to allocate those payments to the employee records. Right, so back over to the demo. I'm going to move off of the employee. No, I'm not going to stay on the employee tasks because we're going to look at salary just to begin with. So I've just highlighted employee 1 and I'll click on the employee record task just to go into their record. Onto the employment tab, I then have this option at the bottom for salary. And because this employee is getting a fixed salary, I've actually entered their annual salary amount, £30,000 per year. And as well as that, I've entered their contracted hours, which in this case will be 35 contracted hours per week. And what that does is it automatically works out the fixed salary for this employee's pay frequency, which is monthly. So I'll divide 30,000 by 12, and we'll be able to create what's known as a factored payment to work out their hourly rate for things like overtime. So pretty simple to enter that information. We also have the pay element section where we can add any additional payment lines. And that would be done by selecting these payments from the payments tab just here. But as you can see, we haven't got any, well, we've got 2 set up at the moment. I'm going to show you where they were set up. And I'll also show you how to create new ones that can then be assigned to any of your employees. Right, so I'm moving off the employee tasks now. I'm going to go into the company tasks because this is where you're going to find pay elements. And this is where you can create any of those non-salary or hourly payments. So I've got a couple just to get us started. I've got a basic payment. If I double click it, I can edit these settings. So I've entered my own description for this. I've set a default value for the hourly rate of £10 per hour, but that can be changed once it's been assigned to an employee record. But I haven't set any default for the number of hours worked because I'm basically going to use this for people that don't work a set number of hours. So we would enter the number of hours they've worked when we run the payroll. You'd set a status for each payment. 4 statuses are variable, fixed, global, and factor. Variable gives you most flexibility. So it gives you the option of changing the hours and the rate at the point you're running a payroll. But if you want to keep a bit more control over the rates, you could make it a fixed payment where the rate is fixed in each employee's record. Or you could even make it a global payment, but that is where the hours and the rate are the same globally. So you wouldn't be able to change hours or rate anywhere apart from the pay element setting itself. Factor is used where you want to calculate a rate of pay based on another payment. So typically that would be for things like overtime payments, but it could also be used for maybe a shift allowance if it's calculated at a percentage of a base payment. So anyway, I've set this to variable. We've then got various payment settings. So the payment is subject to PAYE and national insurance, meaning it's taxable and it's used to calculate national insurance. That applies to pretty much all wages payments that you'll be making. You've got pension settings to include payments in pension qualifying earnings and to calculate pension contributions for the main and additional contribution. And then these boxes on the right-hand side that are ticked relate to attachment of earnings orders. We also have settings for a minimum wage check. So you might want to use this feature if you're paying hourly, and then you'll be notified if someone's getting less than their hourly wage for their minimum wage, depending on how old they are. So we can include values and hours in that check, and then a couple of other settings here at the bottom. So that was a basic payment. I've also got one for bonus. The main difference here is I haven't included the bonus in some of the pension calculations. It obviously depends on how your pension scheme works. Some pension schemes do include bonuses in calculations. And then you can create any additional payments using the new option at the bottom. So I'm going to create a new payment. I'm going to create it for overtime, and I'm going to use that factor option because we're going to get it to automatically calculate the overtime rate based on an existing payment. So I'll start by clicking New. It assigns a reference to the payment. There's no need for me to change that, but I'm going to set the status in this case to factor. Because we've set it to factor, we need to specify what the base payment is. So I'm going to use this for my salaried employees to work out their overtime rates. So the base payment is salary. I'll give it a description. I'm calling it overtime 1.5 times. So time and a half for this payment. I'm not going to enter any default hours because that's going to change, but I can put a multiplier in. So it's a multiplier rather than a rate as such, to say I want this at 1.5 times the base payment rate. So it's going to look at my salary details, it's going to look at the contracted hours, and it's going to work out the hourly rate for time and a half. So I've got similar settings to before. I'm not going to include this overtime payment in pension calculations, but I am going to include it in the minimum wage check. And because it's time and a half, this one includes a premium element. So I've got basic for my casual staff, I've got bonus payments I'm going to use for my sales staff, I've got overtime payments for those salaried that are going to be doing any overtime. Also tabs, which can't really go into due to time constraints, where you can set up your own deductions, repayment of company loans. You've got some settings for attachment of earnings orders, net payments and salary sacrifice deductions. But you'll find more help with all of these in our help center. So now that I've created that extra payment, I will just show you how to assign the payment to your employees. So if I pick out my first employee, you can assign payments individually by going to the Employment tab and then Pay Elements. And from here, you can open up this drop-down list. So I'm going to assign a bonus to this employee. So that's available to pay them a bonus. And because they're salaried, because I've got salary details entered, what I can now do is I can expand the salary payments and find anything that's linked to it. In this case, it's overtime. And I can assign that overtime payment, and it's worked out the hourly rate for me. So time and a half on a 35-hour week, being paid 30,000 a year, is an hourly rate of £24.73 if I'm rounding up. But that will change in line with any changes to the salary that I enter as well. So that's how you would assign the pay element to the individual record. The other way you could do it, particularly if you're setting up from scratch, is using global changes. So I'm going to use my outline groups for this because different departments are going to have different payments. My sales employees, they do get a basic salary, but I'm going to globally assign the bonus payment to them just by going to tasks, global changes and payments. I can then add a payment. We're going to add on the bonus. So you can see that that is now added bonus to those employees. My services staff, again, they're on a fixed salary. I've entered salary details, but they sometimes work overtime. So let's add the payment using global changes for overtime. And I've got casual staff. So they don't have a fixed salary. I haven't entered any salary details, but what I do want to do is to add the basic payment to them, and we'll give them a bonus pay element at the same time. And that has then assigned that payment there in the employee records. So it's picked up the hourly rate from the pay element setting. It could be changed. You could set a different default hourly rate for individual employees if you wanted to. Okay, so quick recap of what we've just seen there. We looked at the salary feature, entering the fixed salary amount and contracted hours. We then looked at pay elements, which we could use for hourly payments, things like bonuses and overtime as well. Right, so we've got about 10 minutes left of our time. A couple of other topics just to quickly run through. If you do have questions and you're able to stick around at the end, I'm happy to answer them then, or you can submit any quick questions now and I'll try and pick them up as they come through. So I just wanted to briefly mention pension schemes. It's now a requirement for employers to provide a pension scheme and automatically enroll employees that meet certain criteria into that scheme. So you will need to set up your pension scheme in the software, and there are a couple of settings that you will need to know about. So 3 things you'll need from the pension provider. You'll need to know the contribution percentages, or in some cases it's fixed amounts, it's almost always percentages. You'll need to know what earnings are pensionable, and that could be qualifying earnings, or it could be specific elements of pay. And you'll need to know the tax relief arrangement for your pension scheme, which will either be a net pay arrangement, where contributions are deducted before tax is taken, a relief at source arrangement, where contributions are taken after tax and then basic rate tax is reclaimed from HMRC by the pension provider. Or it could be a salary sacrifice scheme where the employee reduces their gross salary and the amount that they've sacrificed is then added on top of the employer contribution. So if you don't know what those settings are, you'll need to speak to your pension provider. And I'm just going to give you a quick demo of where to enter those settings for your pension scheme. All right, so we're still on the company tasks, and this time I'm going to go into the pension schemes option. If you've never used this before, there will be 10 templates that you could customize with your own settings. I'm just going to customize one of them. I have a pretty simple payroll with just one pension scheme. So if I edit pension scheme 1, we can start by editing any scheme details. I can change the description. I can set the type of scheme if it falls into any of these categories. For example, group personal pension plan, stakeholder, or master trust. Or if it doesn't fit into any of those types, I can just choose other and I can apply the appropriate settings myself. The SCON is no longer required. It's a scheme contracted out number. You can't contract out of pensions anymore. But you do need to mark whether your pension scheme is a qualifying scheme for auto-enrolment. And if so, whether it uses qualifying earnings to calculate pensionable pay. So this means that all earnings between the lower and upper band of qualifying earnings are used to work out pension contributions, and it would include things like overtime and bonus payments. But you might have a scheme that uses salary only to calculate the pensionable pay, in which case you wouldn't tick the box to use qualifying earnings. So I am going to use qualifying earnings in this case. I'll just show you the setting for salary sacrifice schemes. It's just at the bottom here. And then we can go ahead and enter the contribution details, which in my case is a 5% employee contribution. And the tax relief for this particular pension scheme is relief at source. So that means I need to take the deduction after tax, which is why I will clear the deduct before tax setting. So employer is going to contribute 3%, which I've entered just here. And then we can fill in any provider details, the name of your pension provider, and perhaps the reference that they've given you as well. So we've marked it as qualifying. This one is using qualifying earnings. I've put my percentage contributions in, and the tax relief in this case was deduct after tax. So now that that has been set up, it can either be signed individually to employee records for anyone that's already in the pension scheme. So you go on the pensions tab, manage schemes, and then we can add the scheme from here. You'd need to record the dates they originally joined the scheme and when their active membership was achieved. And you can, if you need to, amend the contributions from the defaults. Or the other option is to assign the pension globally to anyone that's in it. So if I just make a selection of some of the employees that are in the pension, go to tasks, global changes, there it is, pensions, and we can add the pension scheme like so. So that has assigned the pension scheme to these existing employees. For any new employee, if you're using the pensions module, you'll do a pension assessment before you assign any schemes. And we do cover that in part 2 that will be running tomorrow. So quick look there at pension schemes. Those are the main settings that you'll need from your provider. Right, so before we start to wrap up, I just want to quickly run through the Sage HR online services and where you would need to go to set them up, and give you a couple of tips on moving to Sage mid-tax year. So if you're going to be starting to use Sage after the beginning of the tax year and your employees have already been paid, a couple of things that you will need to do. So Sage HR is our online HR system, and included in a Sage 50 Cloud Payroll subscription is the option of hosting your pay slips within Sage HR. So instead of printing a pay slip, you can provide an online copy, and the employees would be able to sign in to the Sage HR portal and access their documents from there. So it's pretty simple to set up, but you will need to create a Sage ID on our website, and you can do that just by following the steps in the setup wizard. So 6 steps to complete altogether. The first one is to sign in with your Sage ID, or create your Sage ID if you don't already have one. And then the second step is to register that payroll company for online services. You can then choose any payroll users that will need access to upload payslips. You enter your employees' email addresses and tick the box to say that you want them to receive online payslips. And then if you have any history in your payroll, you can upload historical payslips, which will complete the sign-up process for your employees. Or that would happen the first time you upload their current payslips as part of your pay run. And then you've got an option of accessing the online services as the employer, where you can take a look at each employee's online payslip, delete them if needs be, or sort of check them for any queries your employees might have. So you find the online services settings from either the company tasks or from online services, and you'll find the full guide on how to set that up in our handout or from our help center. Right, so last thing I'm just going to cover is moving to Sage. These are some tasks that you'll need to complete if you're moving mid-year. If you plan to go live with Sage Payroll from the 6th of April, from the start of the tax year, you won't need to do any of this because there won't be any brought forward information to enter. But if it's mid-year, if you were starting in January, for example, and they've already been paid up to December, you have 2 options. So the first thing you could do, and this might be suitable if you have quite a small payroll and you're looking to get a bit of practice with processing payroll in your software, is to actually enter each of the historical pay dates information in your Sage software. So effectively run the payroll for those previous dates. And then once you've done that and you've created all of the history, you can send a dummy full payment submission, which will mark it as sent in your software without actually sending the information to HMRC. And that way your software is up to date with what you submitted using your previous system. And it means when you do your first live pay run, the FPS will only contain the details for that particular period. So you'd go through, enter all the historical periods, and then from the e-submission settings, you'd send that dummy FPS up to that last pay date they'd been paid up to. The other option, which you'd probably use if you have a larger payroll, or you don't want to go back and enter the historical, process the historical periods, is to enter year-to-date values. So whatever they've earned up to the tax year, up to the point before you started using Sage, would be entered as a year-to-date value. The best place to get this information is from P11 reports, if your previous payroll system has them, or they should have something that's very similar to a P11 report, which will have the relevant details. So you'll need to know the taxable pay to date, the tax that had been paid, and some information about national insurance, so earnings between the different earnings bands, the employee and the total or the employer national insurance contribution as well. So quickly show you where to find those 2 options in the program, and then we will wrap up and I'll stick around for any final questions. So if you decide that you're going to go back and actually run the payroll in Sage for all of the historical periods, once you've finished, you would go into e-submissions and e-submission settings, and you can send the dummy FPS up to the last period that was actually done live in your previous payroll system. So when you do this, make sure you've set your process date to that last pay date that was actually submitted, and then that will mark those submissions as complete in your program, but without actually sending the information to HMRC. If you've not done that, to enter year-to-dates, you can go to the employee tasks and select YTD values. And this is where you can enter basic year-to-date values for each employee. You can save it, move on to the next employee, and repeat for each one. If there's any further year-to-dates you need to enter, you find them on the Employment tab within YTD values. That might include things like statutory payments paid during the year, so maternity pay, adoption, shared parental, etc. So year-to-dates available in the employee records, or the quick way is through this option as well. Right, so we have slightly overrun, and for that I do apologise, but let's give you a quick recap of what we've covered, and the chance for you to ask any of those burning questions that you might have. I just pop them into the questions panel. I'll be happy to pick those up if you can stick around. So we had our quick tour of Sage 50 Cloud Payroll, showing you the navigation groups, how to change the view to view the process maps, etc. We looked at some essential settings. That was a PAYE reference, an accounts office reference in company settings, and your e-submission details as well. We looked at how to set up employee records using Employee Wizard or Quick Employee for individual records or importing them if you want to save some time. Salary and pay elements, we've explored that. We looked at the main pension scheme settings. A quick look at setting up online services, but if you want to do that, there's a full guide in our help center, and then a little bit of info on moving to Sage mid-year. Ideally, you'd go live in April, but if you're not going live in April, you've just got those extra steps as well. Okay, so question in from Kimberly, which I'll answer momentarily. Just to let you know, further support is available from our help center, also from Sage University, sageu.com. You can access our learning paths and certification free of charge right now. We've made it free access to support our customers during the COVID pandemic, which obviously is still going on. So you can access these e-learning courses on demand, a great way to get a bit more in-depth knowledge on the different areas in your software. If you download the slides, you'll get the link to this learning path, but you will need to set up your login for SageU as well. And Help Center, either in product or from sage.co.uk/help, is where you can search the knowledge base, check what's trending, read our how-to guides, check out some of the videos and training, and all of our contact details. So thanks so much for attending today. I'm going to stick around and answer questions, so please add them to the Q&A if you have any. If not, do enjoy the rest of your day. We've got part 2 of this webinar coming up tomorrow at 11 o'clock, so you can sign up for that if you want to attend. But other than that, enjoy the rest of your day, and maybe see you at a webinar soon.